In Matthew 14:22-33 in the Bible, we find the recording of the fifth miracle of Jesus. Jesus had just finished feeding the 5,000, and he wanted some time alone to pray. He told his disciples to get on a boat and go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. During the journey, a violent storm overtakes the boat they're in. They begin to wonder where Jesus was to save them. To make matters worse, the disciples were exhausted rowing and could not make any headway. Jesus comes walking to them on the water, and the disciples became scared, believing Jesus is a ghost. Jesus calls to them, saying, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." What happens next is an amazing story of fear and faith. The disciple Peter, when he saw Jesus walking on the water, asked him if he could come to him. Then Jesus tells Peter to walk on the water to him. Peter, with faith and belief, climbs out of the boat and begins to walk on the water to Jesus. But as soon as Peter gets scared of the wind and waves and takes his eyes off Jesus, he begins to sink. Jesus reaches his hand down and grabs Peter. They climb back into the boat and the storm stops. The disciples immediately begin to worship Jesus and believe that he is truly the Son of God. Peter represented the necessity of always keeping our eyes on Jesus in any situation. When Peter became scared of the raging storm as he walked on the water, he put aside the fact that Jesus was there to help him. That fear placed him into unbelief, and he began to sink. The fifth miracle account shows us a number of things to consider. One is the reminder that God always comes to us in the storms of life. The Lord may not show up at the time we think he should, because he knows when we need him the most. Jesus had waited until the boat was as far from land as possible, when all their hope was gone. In essence, Jesus was gauging the disciples' faith. By walking on the water, he was showing his disciples that the very thing they feared, the racing sea, was merely a set of steps for him to come to them. Even today, we fear the difficult experiences of life, such as loss of loved ones, sickness, and financial hardships, only to discover that these experiences can bring Jesus closer to us. A big question is, why didn't the disciples recognize Jesus? The logical answer is they were not looking for him. Had they been waiting by faith, they would have recognized him immediately. But unfortunately, they jumped to false conclusions that his showing up was that of a ghost. We need to remember that fear and faith cannot live in the same heart, for fear can blind the eyes to the presence of the Lord. Another point to think about is that Jesus proved himself to be in command of the elements, something only God can do. He revealed this truth to the disciples, who then recognized his divinity and responded by a confession of faith in Jesus as God. In Matthew 14:32-33, it says, "The wind died. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, 'Truly, you are the Son of God.'" This was the first time Jesus was called the Son of God by his disciples. Christ has power over the laws and customs of nature to control and dispense with that as he wants. Really, the concern Jesus had for his disciples in this miracle is the distress they showed as he walked nearer to them. Jesus wanted them to realize that he would not leave them comfortless or without help. The story says the disciples were more afraid of an apparition than the winds and waves. The disciples believed it was more terrible to wrestle with the rulers of the darkness of this world than with the dangerous sea. But instead, Jesus is saying, "Be not afraid of me, nor of the storm. Be assured that when trouble is present, Christ is present." The disciples welcomed Jesus into the ship as the storm raged. The fact Jesus had absented himself for a time allowed him to so much more endear himself at his return to his disciples. The fifth miracle also was a display of the ship of the church. While the church can be shattered and distressed at times, it shall come safely to the harbor at last. In a fallen world, the true church can be tossed at sea but not lost, cast down but not destroyed, the bush burning but not consumed. This is H.A. Graves.